Hi everyone, and welcome to our continuing series in the journey to Jerusalem during Lent. Today we're going to be looking primarily at the scripture in Mark 15 verses 1 to 21. Jesus has been arrested, and the temple party have a bit of a problem over that arrest. It was happening so near to the Passover Sabbath. They wanted to put him to death, but they also wanted to avoid a public riot or any kind of disorder, because that would give Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea, an ideal excuse to limit their power. They also needed to get the whole thing over with before the eve of the Sabbath, because the only alternative would be to have Jesus under detention throughout the whole of the festival. And if that had happened, well, there's real possibilities of disorder and riots. For religious reasons, the bodies of the dead would need to be buried before the Sabbath, so that also pointed towards the need for haste. All of this perhaps helps explain the kind of unseemly spectacle of all-night hearings before various authorities that the Gospels report. The high priest and his associates question Jesus. And, in that sort of questioning, they probably hear, well, it seems to be obviously false testimony, some of it contradictory from hired witnesses. And their efforts might have been proved fruitless had he not truthfully answered a final question, a question from the high priest himself. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus, well, he couldn't deny his true status, nor would he have wished to evade so direct a question. In spite of that, though, his answer was categorical, and he must have known it was deeply provocative. I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. The high priest would doubtlessly have made the connection with a passage in the book of Daniel 7, which goes on to say that, that the Almighty gave to this Son of Man enormous authority in power, so that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him, and that his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. It isn't surprising that this is what caused the high priest to tear his robes and shouted, "You've heard his blasphemy." Of course, it's not blasphemy if it's true, but the high priest is prepared to overlook that possibility. Here was the ammunition that was needed to bring him to Pilate on a charge of sedition. They all want him condemned as deserving of death. Jesus was held until the following morning, then taken off to Pilate, because only the governor could sanction an execution. And the hearing before Pilate, well, a bit less colourful perhaps, but it led to the same result. The governor questioned Jesus about his alleged claim to be the king of the Jews. He received ambiguous answers. You say so. After that, Jesus didn't answer any more. So much so that Pilate was amazed, and perhaps for that reason, or more probably for fear of a riot, he seemed to be searching for a way to deal with Jesus that didn't involve his execution. Now, apparently at Passover, Pilate used to release one prisoner at the request of the people, and on this occasion he had two allegedly political prisoners. A violent rebel against the Romans called Barabbas, and the king of the Jews, Jesus. There's no record in secular history of this rather strange tradition. It may well have been a local arrangement, instigated by the governor for his own purposes. He proposed to the crowd around his palace that either Jesus or Barabbas should be released, that they could choose. They could choose. And they did choose. They chose between these two men. The crowd screamed for Barabbas. Pilate then asked the crowd what they wanted him to do with the man you call the King of the Jews. This time they shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" asked Pilate. "What evil has he done?" They simply shouted back even more loudly, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Mark's Gospel tells us that Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas, and after flogging Jesus, handed him over to be crucified. It's a sad epitaph to the memory of the man appointed to uphold the law of Rome in Jerusalem, that the voice of a hired gang of demonstrators prevailed. Perhaps not surprisingly, Pilate, who had already incurred the displeasure of his masters in Rome, was recalled by them a few years later and dismissed for cruelty. What follows is the most stark of all the gospel accounts of the passion and death of Jesus. It's as though Mark wants his readers to see that this was no divinely stage-managed performance. Jesus died. And he died a real death for real sin, the sin of the world. And the cost was pain. The cost was sweat. The cost was blood. First he had to endure the ritual taunting of the prisoners, of execution by the execution squad of soldiers. They'd heard that this fellow claimed to be some sort of king, so they dressed him up in mock royal finery, a purple cloak, a crown of thorns, and then they offered him mock obedience, saluting him, saying, "How, King of the Jews?" Before striking him and spitting on him. Having had their bit of fun, they then turned him out into the narrow streets that led through the city and out towards the little skull-shaped hill beyond the walls, Golgotha, place of the skull in Arabic, or Calvary, meaning skull. It was, as its name suggested, shaped like a skull. The soldiers may have realized that they had beaten Jesus so badly that he couldn't, it was customary, carry his own cross. It was the crossbeam that the prisoners bore, probably on their shoulders. Looking around for a handy substitute, they chose, presumably at random, a man from Cyrene in North Africa, almost certainly a Jew visiting the city for the Passover. Mark calls him a passerby. We might equally well call him a bystander. He'd come to watch the drama, not to become part of it. When Roman soldiers tell you to do something, though, it's wise to obey. So the bystander dutifully took up the cross, placed it on his shoulders, and carried it behind Jesus to Golgotha. The bystander is given a name in the Gospels: Simon. Mark alone tells us that he was the father of Alexander and Rufus. And that little detail perhaps reveals more than is immediately apparent, insofar that Rufus is named later on in the scriptures. Could this be the same Rufus identified by Paul in his letter to the Romans and described as chosen in the Lord? Tradition hints at that. Mark joined Paul in Rome. That might explain how he knew the identity of the sons of Simon of Cyrene. The implication of that, of course, is that the experience of following Jesus, the experience of watching his crucifixion, led in some way to Simon's conversion, and subsequently of his wife and sons. If so, Simon would not be the first person to set out to observe Christ from a distance, but find himself drawn irresistibly into faith in him. The whole point of crucifixion as a method of execution was that it inflicts unbearable pain on the criminal. Mark offers a grim picture of the passion. Jesus rejects the probably kindly meant offer of wine mixed with myrrh, a primitive form of pain relief. The chief priests are described as shouting and mocking inviting the Messiah to come down from the cross to save himself. Meanwhile, the soldiers sat under the cross, waiting for the inevitable moment of death when their miserable duty would be done. Barabbas and Simon of Cyrene presumably went their separate ways. Barabbas to formulate further plans to overthrow the Gentile invaders, Simon to tell his family what had happened and the impact that stumbling, bleeding figure had had on him. People are constantly faced with a choice between two saviors. Barabbas, Jesus of Nazareth, the choice between worldly power, spiritual authority, between violence, forgiveness, between the way of the sword or the way of the cross. One is built on the expectation of success, the other on the necessity of sacrifice, the way of the cross. The way of the cross, as Simon of Cyrene must have seen, is painfully hard and costly. But in the end, it leads to life.